Okay, welcome film festival viewers. I'm Pat Ferrero. I was the program director of the Mendocino Film Festival for many years, and I continue to curate a sidebar called Pat's Picks. And I was really delighted this year to bring you the film you've just watched, IRMI, and I'm about to have a conversation with the two filmmakers, and I'd like to introduce them to you. Veronica Selver and Susan Fanshel. And two things I want to say just in advance of giving you a little bit more about their background, which is that they've both known each other since high school. And they both found themselves becoming professional, independent documentary filmmakers as directors and then making their professional life as film editors. So Veronica, I'll start first with you. As a film director, your films have really taken broad looks at complex social issues. Your film, We Gotta Move, looking at the early civil rights movement. And then you had a really major hand in the seminal and very important film Word Is Out as a producer and just all around collaborator. And then you also co-directed the film on KPFA on the air, really dealing with radio and major communication issues. And then as a professional editor, your work has covered a wide range of social issues, including well, I don't know how recently, if you've probably done other films in between, but you did edit A Fierce Green Fire, which was at the Mendocino Film Festival. And you've also, among your many credits, done the film many of our viewers would have seen, Berkeley in the 60s. And then the very complex film on basically the history of the CIA, a big 3-hour-long investigation. So, you know, you've had a very complex and interesting career as a social issue director and editor. And Susan, now Veronica is in the Bay Area, remains in the Bay Area. Susan, you started in the Bay Area, went to Berkeley, got your degree in fine arts at Berkeley, and then as a film director, I know that two of your early films, one was on Volkus, the West Coast ceramicist, and then one of my very favorite sculptors on the East Coast, Louise Nevelson. And then among your many other directing credits, you directed Weave of Time, which followed the anthropologist John Adair and his work over a 30-year career working with a very famous Navajo family that were particularly, among many things, pioneer weavers, and basically looked at Navajo resilience and change over those decades. But as a film director in New York, you really worked on many of the major PBS series with Bill Moyers, with David Grubin. You worked on a lot of American Experience series, a number of awards, the Peabodys and the DuPonts and the Emmys, just go on and on. In other words, you've really worked on stellar independent work that many people in our audience would have seen on PBS. So one of my questions is, particularly Veronica, since the films that you directed, you co-directed, I wanted to ask a little bit about your two collaborations. And one of the questions is, Susan, because you've known IRMI since high school, because you're old high school buddies, I kind of realized that you had a long history with her as well. And so, Veronica, my question is to you, what made you know that this would become a collaboration? And what did you each bring to it? You as a daughter and Susan as an old friend, but someone with a little more distance in the process of doing a film collaboration, basically co-directing and co-editing.
Are you asking me, Pat?
I am asking you, yeah, since I do know you started the film yourself for a while, and then Susan joined you. So,
Yes.
what made you do that?
Well, you know, maybe the way to turn it around in a certain way is to ask me what made me start doing it on my own. Since in my mind, I knew, I hoped, and more than hoped, knew that one way or the other, Susan and I would wind up working together on this film.
Right.
And so the reason that I started on my own is because, well, first of all, I suppose it was my idea to make a film about IRMI. And because I think I wanted to sort of find my own voice to some extent before enlisting and collaborating with Susan, who is a very strong filmmaker and has a terrific sense of structure, and who also had just enough distance from the subject itself to be extremely helpful. She had the perfect combination of intimacy with the subject matter, a tremendous intimacy between us, and also a kind of distance that allowed me to give up certain things, to pull back a little bit, and move in her direction insofar as we were moving together to make the best film we could. Sorry, that's not a very...
No, I did have one other question that I was unclear about. Did IRMI know that you were going to make a film?
No, she had no idea. And really, neither did I. Neither did I. In the course of just being around IRMI and being a filmmaker with a little camera, I did film things with her.
Yeah.
None of them were with the obvious or with the conscious decision of making a film. They were just moments with her. So no, she didn't have an idea. And as I say, I didn't really, except probably in the back of my mind, I thought that I wanted to have her live on in a way. And I want to say that the key turning point in making the film was when Rob Epstein suggested that I use my mother's memoir as a structural through line. I had already started putting little bits together, little sequences together of a trip we might have taken with IRMI or IRMI on the Cape, but that insight and the use of the memoir is what allowed the film to really kick off. And before Susan fully came on, she also looked at things I had done. She also participated in feedback, as we call it, of cuts that I was doing.
Right.
But I want to say that I knew that I couldn't make it without Susan.
Yeah, yeah. And Susan, how about for you? What, as a filmmaker, do you feel you brought as a unique contribution to the collaboration?
I can't really comment on my unique contribution. I actually have to smile because I wasn't aware that I was destined to do this. I mean, that it was part of Veronica's inner plan. There was a period of time that, Veronica has family in New York and I have family on the West Coast, and we both travel back and forth as part of our lives.
Right.
And in that sense, there were periods of time that I came out to California and looked at things that Veronica was doing, or she brought things to New York and we looked at them. And that was perfectly natural. I mean, and I think we've been habitually sharing our work in different forms over all these years. And I think there was one point at which I actually more officially sat down in an extended period of time with her and we started to kind of throw around ideas about what might happen if this happened or that happened. And then that kind of led to a more official invitation on her part to come, to kind of really join her in the work of making the film. And, you know, I found it very natural to say yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to me, as a filmmaker as well, one of the critical decisions is always the voice. And, you know, Veronica, I noticed that you are not on camera. You are on as voiceover, and yet you interview your sister, and Cappy, your partner, is filmed. How did that decision evolve, that you would not be on camera, and that and also just the brilliant decision to have Hannah Shugala read your mother's voice? That's so brilliant. She's so great.
Well, I feel, you know, sort of the most concise thing I can say about that is I just didn't see how I could be both a filmmaker and a subject. I felt that as the filmmaker, I had to have a different kind of presence, a different kind of, yes, presence in the film. And being a subject it's quite different from being sort of behind the scene. And so it seemed totally natural, appropriate, and organic that I would be a voice, but not on camera. And if I were to be on camera, it would have had to be a very different kind of presence than you know, a subject interview.
Right.
And this was the way. I want to just add one interesting thing, which is that when I started the film, and we had IRMI's memoir as our through line, I was my mother's voice. I read the text. I was not very developed as a voiceover of my own, but I was reading my mother's text, and that's where I felt I was a really strong presence in the film, was sort of merging myself with my mother. And it took a while for me to disentangle from that, identification, and it became clear, it was clear to Susan very much before me that I could not be my mother's voice and also you know, a separate presence in the film, and hence entered Hannah Shugala.
Yeah. That her voice is so perfect. Yeah, I really.
A gift. That was a gift we were given.
Yeah. So Susan, how about you? Was that?
Well, you know, I think that one of the first things, I mean, all of these things didn't happen instantly. You know, there was a development over time, and it's hard even to remember exactly how long and, you know, what led to what. But one of the earliest things that happened when I joined Veronica was that I really helped her develop her voice in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Because, at the point at which, where the film was, when I was sort of more fully engaged, let's say, she hadn't yet had a narrative voice in the film.
Yeah.
And that came out of conversations that we had, that we taped. And some of those conversations stayed in the film as voiceover, and some of them became more the scripted elements that continued that voice in a more precise way, because film always kind of demands that you kind of structure things more tightly. But that evolution of Veronica's presence in the film as a voice, as a commentator, as someone who at times expressed things that were not in the memoir, sorry, my phone is, even though I turned it off, it's still making noise. I don't know whether to just get up.
It's all right. It'll go off.
So sorry.
All right.
But at some point, I don't know at what point it was something that we actually discussed, sort of, okay, let's have this out on the table as to whether or not Monica should be on camera.
Right.
I really felt, as she does, for different reasons maybe, or maybe she expresses it differently because she would be the subject. But I thought her being on camera was not appropriate for the film.
Yeah.
That she, as the daughter who was making the film, was clearly doing the interviewing of the subjects, that she was in a different role than if she had kind of come into the front of the camera and talked to me maybe, but talked to the audience. I mean, if one thinks about it, it changes her relationship. And we both felt that we made the right decision. I mean,
No, I agree. I think the opening of the film, where you kind of welcome us, the audience, into her apartment, is just a really beautiful opening. And you set the tone for, your love of your mother and of her exuberant, just life-enhancing qualities of what a joy it was to be around her. So I think, yes. I mean, I guess in that sense, one of the questions is, how did you, as a daughter, find the right tone for your mother's life? That's a really big challenge,
Well, I mean, if you're asking me, I wanted to say one thing in relation to that, which is that it was clear to me, it was clear to Susan. I mean, Susan and I were very, very copacetic in this. I mean, we had a very good relationship of bringing different things to the film, but our core understanding was the same. And one of the core understandings of the film is that it's my mother's story.
Yes.
It is not the story of a daughter in relation to her mother and all of, I mean, Irene to some extent fulfilled that role. That's not what I wanted my role to be. Right. And so we really focused on IRMI's story. And insofar as I could enhance that story with what I could bring to it was what I wanted to do. And not so much talk about how her story was absorbed or affected me, if I can put it that way. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that was effective. Well, I do have a question, and this actually came from one of the pre-screeners who watched the film. And she observed, and correct me if this is not right, that IRMI led the life of a secular German Jew. And one of my questions is the way in which a kind of Jewish ethic or principles really influenced her life and gave her the particular resilience that she had to face. What was the balance of her religious practice or not, or her more secular life, but the ongoing influence of the ethics of her Judaism?
Well, that's a valuable question. And indeed, my mother was a secular Jew insofar as we were not religious Jews, but even a secular Jew goes to lights Hanukkah candles, goes to synagogue for Yom Kippur.
Right.
And while my mother was a secular Jew, my parents together, my father had a school of social work in France, which was focused on Jewish relief work after the war. And they were very, very Jewish identified, but in a kind of, my mother never found the language that she would have liked to find to describe her connection with Judaism, which was fundamental and profound. But it was somehow in the direction of words that you used, a kind of faith and resilience, a kind of belief in a certain ethical body of of survival,
Right.
and very, very comfortable in her identification as a Jew and her pride.
Yeah. I mean, I think one
That
of
word.
the hearts of the film is after her grief, after losing her first family, when she comes out of being comatose and says, I've decided to live. I just felt that was the whole ground of her cultural belief system moving into high gear.
Could be.
Could be.
Very
Who
well
knows?
be. Could very
Yeah.
well be.
Yeah. Now I had another question, kind of related to your mother's, that she was athletic. She practiced yoga into her 90s. Is very unusual, it seemed to me, for a woman in the 1950s who was upper middle class to get a massage license. And one of my questions was, Germany was really on the cutting edge of body work and healing. You've got Reich, you've got Rolfing, you've got Lowen and other therapists. Did she see her work with massage as part of a continuity of some of the German intellectual work that was being done, integrating body and mind?
This is my father was married twice. He was married to my mother as a second marriage. His first marriage was with a woman named Charlotte Selver. And Charlotte Selver was a Zen Buddhist, a Zen Buddhist. She was very, very big in the Zen community in San Francisco at Green Gulch. And she brought body awareness, if you want. She brought the sort of the physical component to spiritual work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of, I blanked for a moment on the name of her book, but it doesn't matter. So Charlotte, who was always considered our aunt, even though she was our father's first wife, she was very much a part of the family. She really did that. She really it brought a physical component to an intellectual and spiritual work. My mother was much more, if I can put it this way, and it's not a judgment call, much more down to earth. She was very physical, had great strength, had great energy, really enjoyed working in the garden, really enjoyed sports. I mean, she skied when she was younger. And her physical work was, in a sense, she didn't talk about it in any spiritual terms, but it gave her this kind of a life force that she had, that she expressed physically. What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if Susan has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was interesting that she ended up being the secretary of the Freud Institute. And I thought, oh, that's so intellectual and heady. And here she is, the other side. My intuition is that she really had those guys in her hands, that she knew how to kind of hold that together with her esprit and her spirit. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, in the film, she says, I have a difficulty analyzing my feelings of sadness leaving the Freudians. And of course, to me, that is such a funny line. And both Susan and I, we know it's funny because it's sort of a little playful about, analyzing. She had, and she was not a consciously intellectual person. She had perfect intelligence and read, but her disposition was much more physical, cooking, down to earth in a certain way.
Yeah.
So we see these are silly distinctions, but Charlotte Selver
Yeah.
exemplified what you're discussing. what
Right.
you're combining.
Yeah.
And the two of them got along beautifully. The two wives of my dad.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I wanted to ask you a little more about just the art that your family collected and the expressionist painting that IRMI is able to kind of get the museum to purchase, so she gets her home in Truro. Whatever happened to that extraordinary Art Deco furniture, and is there anything else about just that lost art?
It's in the bottom of the sea.
Oh no, really? It was on the ship.
Everything that was on the ship, because Ermi and her husband Carl left Germany soon. I mean, they left in '37, but they had everything was packed, everything was brought to Holland, and before my mother and her family took the ship for Chile, the Dutch Museum in Amsterdam had an exhibit of the work of all of the Wiener Werkstätte work that my mother and her husband had collected. So they had a very substantial collection of furniture in which they lived and artifacts, but that all went to the bottom of the sea. Certain things had gotten lent, as I say in the film, to a museum in Tel Aviv very early on in the 30s. And some of that work, of course, that work persevered. And it was one of those paintings that my mother was able to negotiate selling. I do want to point out it was not an Impressionist painting. It was a painting by an Israeli, German-Israeli filmmaker, Jacob Steinhardt. And the exchange was for $17,000.
Oh,
Those were the days.
yeah, really. Well, it did give her a beautiful, beautiful home in Truro, which is, yeah. So going back to just you're actually collaborating and making the film, Susan, I want to ask you just how you all began to lay out the structure. Were you storyboarding? Were you writing? You were gathering this vast amounts of archival material. Was the process, since you've made many compilation films, was there a process that was familiar and anything unique to gathering these materials to begin to really tackle the structure of the film?
Well, the primary structure for the film came from IRMI's memoir.
Right.
And we didn't follow that to the letter, and in some places we left things out, in some places we rearranged things ever so slightly. So it wasn't, but it did provide a structure. And then some of it was determined also by what visual materials were compelling that we had to work with, and how to make those things come alive when there could be a synergy between IRMI's memoirs and what we had to work with. And sometimes that helped lead us in terms of how much to dwell in one place versus another place.
Right.
Yeah.
So well, you certainly had an abundance of beautiful material, particularly for her early years. It's amazing how much material you were able to gather. And
there was augmentation from the little bit of storytelling that IRMI was asked to do by Veronica, one summer when she had her high-8 camera or her VHS camera, depending on what year it was. So those things allowed us to integrate many different elements into the overall narrative, and helped us also make choices, because they really helped plot out the story. And then there was a dilemma of well, what happened when IRMI's memoirs ended? Because
What's the end?
you
Right.
know, the end of her memoir
Right.
did not mean the end of the film. And because she lived in any number, I mean, what is it, 15 years maybe? Is that right, Veronica? 15, 20? I don't know. And
Maybe 12 or so, 10 or 12, yeah.
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 So, you know, at a certain point, that became an artistic dilemma in terms of the structure of the film and how to transition from the continuity of IRMI's narrative voice through Hannah into another part of the film that happens at the end of the sequence where IRMI returns with Veronica and Irene to Chemnitz. And you know, it seems obvious now, but we struggled with that for it seemed like forever before we were happy with what how the film resolved itself.
Right. Yeah.
That answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many elements. I think, you know, certainly the music, Todd Bucklehide's music is extraordinary in the film and just manages to both give it cohesion, but historic resonance and emotional emphasis. I mean, I think he was really among his full talent was on engaged in tackling this project.
I'd like to say one thing about that sort of is about the whole thing, which is a question of time. We really took our time with this movie. We took our time because it took time to figure it out, but also because we were nobody was pressuring us. And that was true for Todd too. He spent quite a bit of time working on the music, and I think it really enhanced the process. It allowed us to go as deep as we could with that. And I think Todd would agree that the time factor was extremely helpful, the lack of pressure there.
Right. And you spent, what, 5 years? Yeah.
Yeah, a little tiny bit more maybe.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And, you know, we're close to needing to wrap up. So I guess one of the questions I would ask is, here you are finishing the film in the middle of COVID. I mean, we had so hoped to have both of you here. I mean, one of the great pleasures of the Mendocino Film Festival, and for me, a bottom line was to bring the filmmakers to the community for conversation. So I'm really grateful that you're here on Zoom to do it, and really hope that we have you here in the future at some point. But what is your plan for getting the film out to the larger world, and what do you hope an audience will take away from it in these times of COVID?
Well, okay, I think when we were making the film, Susan and I both, we were like, this is a strange bird. Susan had a really nice way of describing it, because you cannot put it in a Holocaust story. You know, it didn't have a really obvious category in a sense. And what I think has surprised us the most, without wanting to influence an audience, is just how valuable the film has seemed for people. And maybe the fact that we are in COVID has enhanced the quality of resilience that IRMI brought to her life. And it's something that we are eager to hear about at this time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we're doing the work of trying to of Jewish film festivals and other festivals and kind of just trying to see where the film might fit. But so far, the response from the audiences that we have shown it to has been sort of, wouldn't you say, Susan?
Yeah, I think that we felt very, I don't know, just very delighted that people, that this is a film with a very kind of true to its subject, but open-hearted, I think. And people have described their responses as being open to, opening emotionally.
Mhm.
And I can't categorize it, but it doesn't seem to fall into, a um, a particular slot, and we're just learning about it too, because it's the first time that we've had a chance to kind of step back and see how people respond to it.
Right.
It's so close to it, I is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Veronica, did it change your own relationship to your mother to make the film? How did it finally inform you? And she lived into her late 90s. I mean, it's also a film about how to age with grace and.
Well, yes, it is that. But I will answer that question, because I think one of the things, and I have thought about this before, and so I've spoken about it in this way that was surprising to me. Both my sister and I really spent our lives in relation to our mother being extremely protective of the pain that we knew she suffered in her loss. And so we really dodged it, for lack of another word. We steered clear of it in some way. We worked with IRMI to be in the present with her, to circle her with our own affection. And working on the film is really the first time that I was able to fully absorb her loss. It's really the first time that I was able to let it come in, because I no longer needed to protect my mother from it. Maybe that protection was not a good thing for her. I don't know. That's how we operated. But that is something that really informed me about my mother's life in the course of making this film.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a beautiful film, and I'm delighted that you both kind of joined us in conversation. Wish you the best with the film going forward, and hope to see you in Mendocino sometime in the future.
Thank you, Pat, and we're delighted that it's in the festival in this way.
Yeah. Take good care.